I'm Erica Gonzalez with the Women's Media Center. And twice a month, my colleague Soraya Shemali and I are bringing some badass women to the table. And case in point, Maria Teresa Kumar, and who is an alum of our Progressive Women's Voices training. It's a yearly training that's offered to get more of our voices out there. So keep posted on that. And, I just wanted to welcome our amazing guest today, who is the co-founder and president of Voto Latino. I mean, I was reading 20 years. It's been 20 years that you've been.
21. Oh,
That is amazing that you've created a lasting institution. And, I just want to mention a couple of things about Voto Latino. It's the nation's largest Latino voter registration civic engagement organization. And under her leadership for the past 20 years, Voto Latino has registered 2 million voters in key battleground states and now reaches more than 6 million Americans each month through innovative campaigns. Maria Teresa Peterson, as many of you know, she's an Emmy-nominated MSNBC analyst and frequent guest host, yay, and is also a senior fellow at the Charles Kettering Foundation. Welcome, Maria Teresa. Always love to see you and talk to you.
First of all, it's been too long.
It's been too long.
And
Yes.
two, I think that the Women's Media Center, I wish everybody knew about you all, because when I first started, you all trained me. You guys would book me. You guys gave me guidance. I mean, the stuff that you actually, I had never been on TV before. I had never done media. I had none of it. And you all gave me the confidence, the know-how, but more importantly, you put me in different spaces and gave me the opportunity. And one of the things that Carol Jenkins is one of your co-founders, one of the things I'll never forget, she told me, she said, the reason sometimes women don't go on TV or they don't go podcasting now is because we feel like we're not prepared enough. And
Right.
She said, you know what, who never says that? Men.
Right.
And the moment she said that, she gave me permission to say, wait a second, we have Google. If I don't know something perfectly, let me learn as fast as I can and talk to experts, and let me actually synthesize. But she gave me that. It was so empowering that I think that it's important for us not to close doors on us, because men normally don't. So
Exactly. Ditto to all of that. That's thank you for sharing that, Maria Teresa. So one of the major things we do is get women out there, and then we talk about narrative, and we see women as being critical, obviously, for people having fuller information and analysis. And one of the things I was thinking about is last year at this time, most of the media coverage was focused on the wildfires in California,
Right.
in LA, and very few platforms were talking about how Latina domestic workers, care workers were being affected, displaced, and then brought into the cleanup with not enough protective gear, what have you. We talked about it at the WMC, and then now where we're at, it's like we're in this continuing nightmare, across the nation, different major cities. That's just like, I can't, there are no words for it. But
Yeah.
one of the things I think of, I see, which is great. There are a lot of content creators and that are talking about what we were trying to like hammer for so many years, the drumbeat of the immigration industrial complex. So like there are a lot of content creators, influencers that are talking about, and other policy folks, the privatization, the profiteering off of immigrant bodies and contracts and what have you. And I mean, we remember the whole struggle in Arizona with SB 1070 and the show me your papers, like Black and brown people have cut their teeth too many times on this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, like, it was one of the gaps that I was thinking, because there was such conversation about it to some point, like when Lou Dobbs was on CNN and like connecting immigrants to spreading leprosy, like just spreading falsehoods, and there was a campaign, et cetera, to get him off. And then it kind of like, I don't know, receded. And I just wonder, what difference would it have made to have more Latinas around the tables on these shows, on op-ed pages, et cetera, instead of some people being in discovery about what this entire assault is about, you get, thankfully you're there. We see Paula Ramos from time to time, but it's not enough. I mean, our report several years ago talked about less than 2% of guests on all of these shows, and I doubt that that's changed any much are Latinas. So, we'd love to hear your thoughts about that, about like why it matters for the general public and for our community.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that we should go back. Latinas in this moment, Latinas in America, we are living a completely different reality than our fellow Americans, regardless of status. And I think that we really need to take a moment and pause and reflect on that, because we are not only taking care of our families, we're oftentimes working and taking care of other people's families, all with the burden of not knowing if we're going to be profiled because we are Latina, all with the not knowing what they're going to do to our men if they get pulled over, not knowing if we're going to see our sons. It's all very heavy. And so I want to take just a moment just to celebrate every single one of us, because the stuff that people are, because we are not in the narratives, because we're not covering these stories en masse, because Hollywood doesn't portray us properly, because we are not in the positions that we should, we are living a completely different experience that the majority of Americans can't even imagine in this moment. And it's very real. And I have to say that when someone reaches out and just to check up on, just check up on the immigrant community, I don't think people understand how incredible that is, because it's a release valve, right? And I think what we saw with Renee Good and the murder of Alex Petrie just speaks to these allies that, someone said, well, they didn't have to die. I said, they didn't, but they had values that were deeper than any party. They had human dignity that they were trying to protect. And I do think that in this moment, we have to center on what's happening in Minneapolis is very much because of you are brown or black and have an accent. I mean, that is what is happening. And I think that we are losing that narrative, and we cannot. There was a purpose for why Renee Good was there, and there was a purpose for why Alex was there. And that was to hold witness and to protect the most vulnerable among us. But as Latina women, we rarely have that space to even speak out loud to it, because there is an overwhelming sense right now that it keeps coming, right? And one of the biggest challenges I often have is that no one has taken into account that it was disproportionately immigrants and Latinos that brought us through COVID. And we have not caught a break, right? First, we had the first Trump administration that basically marginalized us and demonized us. Then we had COVID that basically, on the backs of our people, we had a raging economy because some of people had choices, but the majority of us did not. And then we have, once again, the assault and the demonization of the Latino community, regardless of our status. And I say this because they use undocumented immigrants, but the fact that the Supreme Court said that it's okay to racially profile anybody, it's actually a break of our Constitution and our trust. And so if you were to ask me, like, why are we here? It's for the work that the Women's Media Center tries to do every single day. And that is to break down marginalized communities and bring voices. Because if you have different perspectives, making executive decisions on what stories to cover, how you have these conversations, how understanding the nuance, understanding the strain that is right now in the Latino community, you would have far more empathy than we do now. There would have never been an auditorium full of people holding signs saying mass deportation. It just wouldn't have happened. But it speaks to the own bias of the media, that because they don't have diversification in our voices, that they weren't able to stop it then. I think you and I would probably have a long cafecito, and we're actually not surprised what's happening. Because we
Right.
tried to warn you all, right? Like we have worked in these communities long enough to understand that there's a vileness that, if unleashed, is really hard to stop. But you know what? We do every single time. And it's often led by Latinas with our men, and we work very closely with other allies. But I do think that for the last 10 years, we have been living such a vastly different experience, and it's culminating now. And so for all those women, please make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Make sure that you're taking time out. We don't have to carry it all at once. We just have to do it every once in a while. I was listening to someone, they said something to me that was so beautiful just yesterday. A friend of mine, her name is Lisa Ross, and she's phenomenal. She's a former president of Edelman. And she was like, we don't realize that when there's a choir, the reason that a choir could hold notes so long is that individuals take breaths in between.
Mm, that is so good. That is,
Right. And so we are absolutely in the fight of our lifetime. But if you need to step out, there are still voices that are carrying our work forward. And we have to make sure that we are providing ourselves with that space. But the reason we are here is because of what you are all trying to combat. And that is the lack of diverse voices. And even when I look out of who's covering these stories right now, God bless them. All of a sudden it's the most popular story. And the Latino community is not leading it
right.
because now it's
Exactly.
kind of sexy. Now in that coverage, you are losing the nuance, you're losing the trauma, you're losing the opportunity also to elevate the strength of so many people that are self-organizing and that are leading. And
Self-organizing.
there's a young man in Philadelphia. He's a young Latino. He's helping organize hundreds of people in churches on how to protect their families against ICE. He should be everywhere. Right. And so so oftentimes when you don't tell these stories, then you create a victimization of
Yes.
community and you don't give us agency. And I have to tell you, we have so much agency because, like I said,
Yes.
only have we shouldered the economy of this country, we shoulder the economies of Latin America. And I think that we have to create spaces for these stories because otherwise we feel like we can't make changes, even though we're making changes every single day.
Exactly. It's either, and going back to the narrative, it's either us as victims or J-Lo and Carol G. Like there's nothing, there's nothing
Well,
about
we need their
agency
voices, but I
and
do, but
power,
yeah, but
you
we need
know?
their voices, yeah, but we do
And
need, tell me,
I want to
right?
give a shout, and I do want to give a shout because there's some platforms out there that have decided to take the self-determination route and that are
Right.
constantly profiling our community from our own lens. So like, the Latino newsletter, you have folks like Michelle Garcia that have been like speaking truth to power for a long time.
Yeah.
But, I wanted to add that, going back to your point about where like this has turned ugly into uglier. Like Latinas, people forget that Latinas have the widest wage inequity gap. We're supporting families here and supporting families back home so they don't have to migrate. Even Puerto Ricans after Hurricane Maria and at the destabilization of Puerto Rico, we're making more trips to see family members, etc. So it's like this sandwiching, and then also your point, and then also like during the pandemic, a lot of the work that Latinas do, since some of it is at the margins of the economy, wasn't acknowledged as essential work. So I didn't see that other than like the Latina Futures Lab and some spaces here and there. I really did not see that so that people could speak directly from a policy point of view and action point of view to that kind of like
I
swirl.
could tell you, like, I wholly support Latina Payday. I wholly support it, pero cada vez que pasa me choca. And the reason me choca is because we have to be candid. The reason that Latinas make 53 cents on the dollar to a white man for the same work is because of the vast inequities, and we haven't passed immigration reform.
Right.
So when you see a headline that says Latinas make 53 cents on the dollar, it's not pobrecita, that's exploitation.
Right.
Because they are not getting paid fairly because they have to oftentimes work under the table because employers would rather pay under the table than pay a fair wage. So if we actually want to resolve and solve and actually care about human dignity and equity and dignity in work, then we actually pass immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. Because one thing I can tell you, they're all paying taxes. They're all
Right.
paying into our
That's
social
right.
security. They are all contributing in a way that is either with their physical bodies. They're always, and we know oftentimes people say, well, I don't subscribe to that. Well, you know what? You live in America. If you're eating, if you go to the nail salon, if you are going to your dry cleaner, likelihood you are complicit because there's an undocumented immigrant that has been actually providing you for all those services. And so if you don't like it, then you call your members of Congress and say, let's provide a pathway to citizenship. Because I can't imagine many Americans actually okay with what's happening in Minneapolis, because that's a militarization and that's a charade. That is actually not what actually happens when you do mass deportation. That's theatrics. And it
Right.
starts with the Latino community, but we're very clear that it's not ending with the Latino community, because there are so many people now that are non-Latino or non-immigrant getting wrapped up into this. And we saw it very visibly with the deaths of these two individuals, but also let's not remember they were not the only deaths.
Right. And that's the thing that we've been talking about for years, that the system was in that post 9/11 fear climate. It was being built to be invasive, bloated. It's like the largest, agency, law enforcement budgeted agency, put that in quotation marks, and that would become a sprawling nightmare for everyone. So, I'm curious, because you've had, you get asked. I mean, you've been all over the media. You're such a pro, and so what is your take on? Because, so for example, at the Women's Media Center, we have a She Source database that has experts.
Yep.
No hay excusa. There's no excuse. And there's some stellar, not some, there are a lot of stellar Latino journalists. So what is it? What is it? Almost feels deliberate sometimes, honestly, to me, because how long have we been talking about our voices needing to be at the table and representation, like decades, right? So what is not clicking for people that they just feel okay with, like having panel daily panels and op-eds running and all these kind of interviews and podcasts, and not even having a Latino in the room for months on end?
I mean, I think it's wild. And Voto Latino, we actually we address this issues, in a nice, in a tangential way, by having our voice is it's a celebration of diversity in media on the night before the Correspondents' Dinner, the White House
Nice.
Correspondents' Dinner. And we recognize strong Latina, African American, Asian voices every single year, recognizing that if we're not creating that space, there's no excuse, right? But that said, you haven't seen the newsroom change fast enough. And I do think that why we're here is because no one has been explaining the browning of America to the rest of the country. If I can go into a classroom in Georgia and that's 22, 23% Latino, that's the country's changed. If I can go into Arkansas and go into certain school districts where the classroom is 70% Latino, the country's changed. But because we are not telling honest narratives, what happens is that you have a demagogue, like the person in the White House, to try to scare us of being afraid of each other. But our greatest strength, and I will stand by this to the day I die, our greatest strength is our diversity. It is our multiculturalism. And the only, and people had scratched their heads and say, Maria Teresa, are you sure? I said, if I wasn't sure, I would only have to look at the fact that China and Russia have active anti-multicultural campaigns targeting our communities every single day. Remember what, that horrible statement that he said, that Haitians were eating dogs and cats.
Yes.
Roll our eyes. About a week later, there were a whole bunch of bomb threats disproportionately at high schools, if you recall. New York Times did a whole story on it, but they buried the lead. Those calls came out from outside the country.
Wow.
That
should have been the headline. That should have
been the headline. But it was a spirit. And so when people say, well, Maria Teresa, are we made for cultural America? I said, we're in an interglobalized world. As human capital, our strength is our diversity, our multiculturalism, our ability to go to move, to code switch in different rooms, not just in America, but worldwide. And when those skills are increasingly the most important, those are the ones that are going to differentiate any economy from anybody else. That's why Russia and China are trying to make, create bots and mayhem online to create divisiveness and bots. And that's why it also that's why their agenda resonates with white nationalists. We need to get our act together and recognize that our strength is this diversity, and we have to get our act together, that we have to have the right narratives so that people actually understand what it is like to be an American living in America.
So how do we, I mean, this stuff is just getting more intense, like the landscape between AI, this went from Cambridge Analytica to, like this $1 billion investment in propaganda and whatnot. And then you have like the under normal, quote unquote, normal circumstances, like this, like Latina invisibility. So how do we compete with that? Because we can't outspend it. In my opinion, one of the ways is relational organizing. I mean,
Yep.
like people been, and the investment hasn't been there. That's my take. But how do we compete with that in a community that's getting volumes of information on social media, WhatsApp, what have you, and then try to discern what's fact from fiction? So how do we what do we need? What do you think we need to do or shift?
One, I think is one thing that brings me joy and pause is the fact that we've done tons of studies trying to figure out where the Latino community is, what information they're getting. And one of the things that we have learned is that young people, even though they read something that may sound kind of factual, they actually go and Google it themselves. So we actually are
Great.
creating, and I think it's because, especially in the Latino community, we feel such pressure to make sure that whatever information we're providing to our loved ones and to our friends and to our family, that it's accurate, right? And so we have a tendency of really fact checking everything. So that's really good. We need more of that in school. And one of the things that we do at Voto is also we create interventions. So we actually, when we see something that's really wrong, perfect example, don't get vaccinated. We actually went to find out who was saying it, how they were hearing it, where they were seeing it. And then we created separately information that they can use that was digestible. And what people didn't realize
Right.
is that by creating those interventions, it's a kind of an inoculation. One, that person gets vaccinated, so you're helping save a life. But two, they stop spreading bad information.
Great.
And so the more that you can train up really trusted voices at the Women Media Center, making sure that people keep their authenticity, that it's not highly polished, that they are who they are, that is actually what we need. Is we need literally an army of individuals that desperately care, who are experts, that the communities can trust. That's how we combat it. And sometimes, I often say, it's like, if it sounds too easy, if it sounds too free, that's all of a sudden your spidey sense should go up and saying, oh my God, it's none of the above. And I do think that one of the things at Voto Latino, we're gonna start, my team's gonna yell at me, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
Let
We're
them
gonna,
yell.
we're gonna do we're gonna launch a whole different verticals called El Brief. And the idea is like giving people really small pieces of information that are fact checked, that they can consume, but they could also share it really easily, because we do need more trusted voices. And I do
Yes.
think that there has to be a point where the media companies, I would actually argue, I know this is gonna, I would actually argue that the reason that media companies are where they are is that they didn't diversify a multicultural America. And so a multicultural America, principally Latinos, had to go find information elsewhere. They had to go to YouTube to find information when it comes to news they could use. They started diversifying, they went to TikTok, but it's
Right.
because they basically, if you look at all the major networks, their eyeballs are aging out. But it's because they missed the boat. They didn't have executives
Right.
that looked like the Browning of America. They didn't have executive. And so part of it, you're just like, yeah, you could say that the diminishing returns of major news corporations is because, people went to other platforms. They went to other platforms because you weren't giving them what they were looking for.
Right. Right. And people found, right, in the void, they found it elsewhere and more authentically, authentic. I mean, some of these content creators, and I was journalist for many years,
Yeah.
they are outstanding with their rapid response, their analysis, their breakdown of power, which is really critical. Their analysis of power and the way it's operating that you don't see in mainstream. We have to wrap up in a minute, but I wanted to ask you, what are your takeaways from last fall and like where we're headed with midterms?
I will tell you that in 2020, compared to 2024, a third of Latinos who voted did not vote. A third. So a third voted. So all the headlines were that Latinos voted for Trump. We saw a movement there. But the buried story was, if you voted in 2020 and you're like, you know what, I don't like Donald Trump because he's a racist and the Democrats aren't doing enough for us, I'm not going to vote at all because my vote doesn't make a difference. Guess what? It makes a huge difference. And I am so proud of the people of California because Latinos in California said, you know what, I'm going to go vote for Proposition 50. It's just really, you know, it doesn't impact me right away, but I'm going to go ahead and vote for it because I'm going to go show a protest vote. The turnout in that special election was at the same as if it was a midterm. And so if
Wow.
we can take a clue from what happened in California at Voto Latino, I want you all to come and check your voter registration status, because even if you voted in the last time, they're trying to take you off. So learn right now, check to be sure that you're still registered to vote. If not, you could register at Voto Latino. And once you're registered at Voto Latino, I like to say at Voto Latino, we are your cool older sister until you register to vote with us. And then we become your really sweet, annoying aunt. And so we'll remind you until you voted.
I love it. That's good. That's great. Boy, I want to congratulate you on your leadership and all of the work that Voto Latino is doing. I mean, that's become even more urgent. And, you know, we gotta keep bregando. I don't
No, pero sabes que this is what's fun is that I know that when we all vote, we actually will change the direction of this country. And that's what they're trying to make us feel powerless because they know
Yeah.
how powerful we are. And we need to internalize that. We need to realize our power porque sabes que they wouldn't be chasing us down if they weren't afraid of us.
Yes, exactly. And you know, to the point in the meeting, you had mentioned Hollywood before entertainment. It's like the Latino agency story is rarely to be found unless it comes out of our community. So, I mean, like people will go out and buy a product that they see somebody use online for like a, you know, in some movie for a minute, you know, it'll sell out, you know, so it's like,
Guilty.
yes, myself, you know, so like, you know, don't talk to me about like, oh, like the divorced artistic license kind of stuff, you know, so it's like the production. So, I mean, I just think the investment of our dollars has to be in our own production and our own information, because who's going to tell our story better than we can, and from a lens of power and agency. So I would love to keep up the conversation. Let's schedule another one, and I hope to
Love
see you
that.
in DC.
Un abrazo, por favor,
Okay.
let me know cuando vienes,
I will.
okay?
I will.
Gracias por todo that you
Okay.
all do. You should be so proud, really. And
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you.
forever grateful. Un abrazo.
Okay. Cuídate mucho. Okay.
Igual.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.